A share in the spoils was usually enough to buy clemency. Edward I, the successor to Henry III, attempted to attack pirate bases by land. As England had no real navy at the time, he was alternately at war against the Welsh and the Scots, who considered English merchants easy targets. Failing in his attempt to fight a war against the pirates by land, Edward I instituted the practice of issuing marcas, or letters of reprisal. Such letters granted a merchant or shipmaster the brothers to pirates and corsairs 35 right to attack the pirates or their home port, if the merchant or shipper could claim to have suffered loss at the pirates' hands. 2 Other ports would then have their monarchs issue the same type of documents, which allowed them to plunder an English port should they be the victims of an English pirate. Edward's lack of ability to rule the seas was matched by his ineptitude at ruling on land. His interference in the morass of bloody politics that was Scotland led to many wars. The wars against Scotland and the lack of centralised order in England would allow Scotland to flourish as a pirate haven. The Templars in Scotland, a simple act, would serve as the catalyst for new hostility between England and Scotland. Alexander III, the Scottish king, had preserved neutrality, but in 1284 he was killed not in battle, but from falling off his horse after a night of partying. 6 guardians were appointed to ease the successorship, and for a brief time these guardians ruled Scotland. But Edward I of England exercised his right to choose who would succeed Alexander. Of the handful of claimants to the Scottish throne, the leading candidate was John Balliol, who was supported by the powerful Comyn family. The other main candidate was Robert the Bruce, who had the support of his country. 3 Edward's court picked Balliol. When Balliol and the Comyns would not back Edward in internal conflicts, Robert would support Edward, which gave Robert the opportunity to reclaim his lands from Balliol and the Comyns. After the Warlace revolt, Scotland was controlled by the triumvirate of Bishop William Lamerton of St Andrews, Robert the Bruce, and John Comyn. On February 10, 1306, Robert somehow managed to get Comyn to meet him at the Church of the Grey Friars in Dumfries. While neither side trusted the other, the hallowed sanctuary made Comyn assume he was safe from violence. He was wrong. Robert the Bruce eliminated Comyn in the church by stabbing him and leaving him to die on the stone floor. There are several versions of 36 piracy. A merry and a short life what transpired, but it is very likely that the attack was spontaneous. When Robert ran from the church and told his confederate what he had done, the man ran into the church. Seeing Comyn already in the care of the friars, the confederate rushed to the wounded man and stabbed him again until he was sure Comyn was dead. Robert then had himself sworn in as king by Bishop Lamerton in the Abbey Church at Scone. Despite the official coronation, both England and the Catholic Church made sure that Robert the Bruce would not take a throne. For several years he was an outlaw king, pursued first by Edward, who died in the campaign against Robert, and then by Edward's son, Edward II. Robert spent the early years of his reign living in caves and travelling in disguise. He was not only outlawed by the King of England, he was also excommunicated by the Pope. Robert's exile did not last forever. His salvation was realized at the Battle of Bannockburn, but events that took place hundreds of miles away from the battlefield helped tip the scales in his favor. The same papacy that made Robert an outlaw of the only official religion in Europe had also declared the Knights Templar to be outlaws. The Templar fleet and the remnant organization that managed to escape from La Rochelle in the nick of time found refuge in Scotland. The St Clair family of France, a powerful force behind the Templars, had most likely negotiated an alliance with Robert through its Scottish side of the family, the Sinclairs. The French had probably been arming Robert since 1310, by smuggling arms into Ireland, and then into Scotland. At this point they smuggled an entire army to aid Robert. While the history of Scotland both before and after Robert the Bruce is riddled with one defeat after another at the hands of much more organised and better equipped armies, the Battle of Bannockburn was the exception. In this historic battle, which was contested on June 24, 1314, a sacred day to the Templar Knights, the battle at first seemed to go well for Edward's army. He had at his disposal 20,000 soldiers and 3,000 knights on horseback, who fought against a force less than half their brothers to pirates and corsairs 37 size. But just when victory seemed at hand, a fresh contingent of knights came charging from the rear of the Scottish force to soundly and spectacularly beat Edward's troops. The remnant Knights Templar led Scotland to victory over the English army, which made Scotland independent of its overlord. An elite group that was at the core of the Knights Templar existed in France and Scotland prior to the arrests, and they remained united afterward. At the heart of this group was the family of St. Clair. In Europe they started as part of the Norse wave of conquerors that changed the face of the continent. The St. Clairs and their Norse countrymen were called Normans, and they settled in northern France, where the king handed over great amounts of land in exchange for being allowed to keep the rest. Under William the Conqueror, the Normans successfully invaded England. This resulted in members of the St. Clair family being granted tracts of land in England and Scotland. The St. Clair branch eventually changed its name to the more anglicised Sinclair, but the family connections in France, Scotland, and even to a degree in their Norse homeland remained intact. The St. Clair/Sinclair family became a very strong presence in the politics of both France and Scotland. Although they preferred a secondary role in the public eye, they often controlled the politics from behind the scenes. The loyalty of a strong military was one component of their power. After Bannockburn, Henry Sinclair, a descendant of the French noble St. Clair family, organized the remnant Templars into military units and guilds. They would become the integral force of his power base, and he in turn would become their guardian. In 1320 Sir Henry signed a letter to Pope John XXII asserting the independence of Scotland. This was a unique document in the history of the world, predating the American Declaration of Independence by more than 4 centuries. While Sinclair never played the leading role, he ruled quietly from behind the scenes, and the remnant Templars were his big stick. They would remain united, and cemented their loyalty to their benefactor. 38 Piracy. A merry and a short life the Guild, and the Lodge. In times of peace the ex-Templars used their skills as masons,